Welcome to Clergy and Collars Getting Coffee. Today, my special guest is the Reverend David Baer. He began his service as Stated Clerk for the National Capital Presbytery on February of 2023. He previously served for 17 years as the pastor at Highlands Presbyterian Church in Allendale, New Jersey, and for 4 years as the part-time Stated Clerk for the Presbytery of the Southern New England. He's a graduate of Cornell University, where he majored in computer science, and Yale Divinity. He is newly moved back to Fairfax, Virginia, where he grew up, and he now lives with his wife, their 2 children, and Baxter, their beagle. So welcome, David, to the show.
Thank you. You may get to hear Baxter at some point here.
That's always welcome. Everyone's welcome. So one of the things that I'm wondering, I'm just curious about, because I mean, I would assume your background in computer science helps you with wanting things to have a process. But when would you say that that love of, and I'm assuming it's a love because you're now do Stated Clerk stuff as well, of process, procedure, rules, like when did that begin?
You mean in my professional life, or you mean?
No, just anytime.
Oh, yeah. So I was like 3 or 4 and visiting my grandfather, and he was a chemical engineer and designed I don't want to get off of the weeds too much, but vacuum metallizers. So he was really early on. That's like the Mylar film, right? Where you have this plastic film with a thin layer of metal on top of it. So he was a real early adopter of personal computer. It was like back in the early 80s. And he had this thing on his desk, and he showed it to me, and he showed how like you could enter some code, and all of a sudden there were these like colored rectangles jumping up on the screen. And I was just fascinated that you could give instructions to this thing, and it would do amazing things that you couldn't do on your own. I couldn't draw rectangles that fast.
Yeah.
Not
at 3 anyway.
Right. And before long we had our own personal computer at home, and I was poking and prodding at that and experimenting and breaking things in ways that confounded my parents. Just all part of the experimentation.
Yeah.
So that began really early, and I think a lot of folks that went into from my generation had similar experiences, that they got into computers just because they were mucking around on a family machine, and so I mean that was a big love of mine growing up. Yeah.
It's still a love? Is it still something you like? Are those still skill sets you use in your work?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it comes out now most often in just sort of the data processing, like all the stuff that is necessary but boring about the job. So for example, like as clerk, we're responsible for filing paperwork with the Office of the General Assembly.
Right.
And so you submit a bunch of reports. You can download a PDF that kind of has a single page for each of the changes that you submitted. And I learned early on it's really useful to save those because you want to have a record of it. And so I just created a script that would go through and split the PDF into single pages, rename them according to just extract the person's name out of the page, what date it was filed, and then copy it into the electronic.
And how much time does that save you?
Well, it builds up over time, right? So I mean, it's an investment of like an hour and a half to write the script, but then over the next year, you make that time up in the first 4 or 5 times you use it. So
This is I mean, this is fascinating to me. My brain does not work in the same fashion, as in, like, I could probably have taken all the computer classes in the world and still would not be able to write code. I think it's a specific type of mind, have people go, yeah, I get that it's an algorithm, and another one for people who like can understand it and create it, and then begin to design, like copy it and then design their own.
Right.
Like there's a different processing that happens. I feel like, I have some brothers whose brains process very much like in that engineering fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And my eldest child, his does. And I'm like, I watched him learn how to solve a Rubik's Cube and went, my whole life I've never been able to solve a Rubik's Cube. I only mess them up. I'm great at messing them up, but but then in other systems, it like works, right?
Yeah.
So designing other efficiency systems that work for me to be able to, make the work, or I would say even what you're talking about, sometimes the chore work of life. Because as adults, we all have chores. Like, how do you make it not feel like as much of a chore? So do you share these gems with other stated clerks, or are they like, David, that's your own system, do not want that?
Yeah, this is where I've wrestled, right? Because
Right.
I come up with this stuff, and then I feel like, but my use of technology is so esoteric, and like, okay, this could be useful to somebody else with, you know, half the years of experience that I have coding. Well,
Right.
that's still a lot.
Right.
For them to make it work, you need these secondary tools, and you need to install this library and be comfortable like entering commands on the command line. And by the time you've learned all that, it's like, well, it would have been faster just for you to do it the way that you're accustomed to doing it. So I got a lot of stuff that works for me, that makes my life easier, but it isn't necessarily marketable. So I don't know, maybe this is why I'm not in the computer industry, right?
Because it works for you and it's not marketable to everybody else.
Yeah.
So when did that, like, because I mean, those things don't go away. I'll call it your 3-year-old call story to like this sort of life, right? But when did that transfer into something like more theological then? When did that move happen?
Yeah. I don't know. I sort of have these moments along the way. I mean, there is family history. So my grandfather was minister in the United Church of Christ.
Same grandpa? Different?
No, different one. On the
I
other
was
side,
like, that's fascinating. That's like real family.
right,
Like,
right. No, yeah, no, he was not simultaneously a pastor and a chemical engineer.
okay.
No, so my other grandfather was, and I think even served as a conference minister at one point. So we got judicatory work too. And so my mom was a PK. Growing up, both of my parents, I only ever known Presbyterian Church pretty much. Both of my parents very active, and so it's the scripture from Deuteronomy, right? That you speak about the faith while you're at home, while you're away.
Yep.
That was lived out in our households. That we were doing certain things like the crop walk because of who we are, right? What we believe about God, and the claims that faith places on us. So that was always kind of swirling around. I was talking the other day to somebody, though, just in terms of ministry. My grandfather died when I was 9, so there's never a chance to kind of unpack a particular sense of call with him. But not too long after that in my life, I remember being at a special service. I think it was a Maundy Thursday service at church, and there were some seminary students visiting, and I think I was asking questions or something like that, and one of them said, "Oh, those are some good questions. Have you ever thought about ministry?" And my mother sort of, waved it away like, oh, I think we have a budding engineer here. But there was this little spark that, I mean, that's why I still remember it, right?
Right.
This little spark that caught, and I thought, okay, I guess, that is a possibility. And then when I was in college, studying computer science, I fell in with a campus ministry, and pretty much from orientation week on, and that was the place where everybody knows your name.
Right.
That was community. It was a safe space to unpack questions about calling and
Right.
faith and identity and all this other kind of stuff. And I just kind of naturally fell into some leadership roles there, leading Bible study. The chaplain, as I got to be a upperclassman, asking me to preach, and it was the first time I did that was okay. The second time, though, there was something, again, electric, right?
Right.
That in kind of praying over the text and thinking about what's God saying to me, what's God saying to my peers, offering that in worship, and then having the experience of my friends saying, I don't know how you did it, but that was exactly what I needed to hear today.
Right.
And so, okay, when I offer myself in this way, the Holy Spirit kind of takes hold, and something blessed, something providential takes place. And that just kind of, that's what it took to catalyze it for me. That at this point, there were just months left in my senior year. Application deadlines for seminary had long passed, and so I had to figure out something else to do. But that's when I started actually naming it and speaking it aloud to myself and other people. That I think this is a call, and I think the next step for me is to go to seminary.
Wow. I mean, that's a beautiful process of how that happens. I also think like hearing you tell this, your call story in this way is also, we never know the impact. Like, you don't even seem to know those students' names who planted that seed, right? They were just people visiting the church. And I think sometimes we don't fully understand the power of our words and our actions sometimes as human beings, like where those seeds get planted, like the fact that you might be the only person in somebody's day who goes, because some people can be very annoyed by children asking questions, right? I've definitely encountered those people both as a child and then as an adult with, who's around kids, that they're just like, they don't welcome the questions or the curiosity or whatever. Now, I will admit that there are sometimes I welcome them better from other people's children than my own sometimes, if my own are doing it at like bedtime, right? Then I'm like, we really need to stop with all the questions and go to bed. But like, I think sometimes we don't understand how those, like what God will do with those sparks, those moments, and how those really can get fanned into a real flame. And then from that, the different ways that the Holy Spirit leads, our lives in various directions. I mean, I would say that God has done a tremendous job of putting together your gifts, into this new position as a fully into, right, a stated clerk position. Like, this is what you do full time now. But those skills and gifts that were ever present. I mean, one of the things I didn't say as I introduced you is like how we met. And how we knew each other was that we were both on the Synod PJC. You were the moderator of the Synod PJC. I mean, not when I came on, but eventually you did that, which excellent. That's definitely a skill set. I learned so much. And there were several people involved in that, but listening to you and Arnold talk, I could still do for hours. just listen to the two of you go off on, I don't even understand half the words and things you're talking about, but I have so much fun listening to the two of you talk. You understand each other fully. But like, but some of that is, it was at a, I have always loved the, like I said, the efficiency and the rules and things like that. But you framed them in a very different way. And I would guess for me, my understanding was like, there's some of us like that are feeling forward people, right? You learn how to stick them in the background, but your feelings forward. And there are others that are like analytical forward. You have feelings, you're not robots, right? But you compartmentalize that stuff based on, like, you're like, well, let's see what the rules say, and then we'll develop the pastoral response. And some of us go, I don't care what the rules say, I just want the pastoral response. And you're like, no, these are important. And I think that's one of the things that I learned in that process of being on such a committee with you is the value of the collaborative work of reading a text. And I would say like our book of orders is a text, right? So how do we like, read that together? And now you have taken that, like, you're not on the Synod PJC anymore, though of course these are lifelong appointments. You could be brought in at any time, I guess.
Well, sort of.
Yes, but like now it at some point the call in ministry also transformed to like, this is a skill set. I've seen this from various sides now. How do I help the church be healthier in order to prevent more cases from going through that process? Right. I maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. Was that part of, I guess that's the question, was that part of the process? How did that evolve over time?
Yeah. So the PJC moderator when I came on was named Joan Wolfarth, and she was a ruling elder. And I just really valued the first thing that we would do after we had heard the sides for the formal session and kind of dismissed everybody, and it was just us in the room, is she would gather us back again into prayer. And kind of saying, now that we have heard all of everybody tell their story, what does it look like for God to bring wholeness into this situation?
Oh, yeah.
That really stuck with me. That as we apply the rules, that there's a higher purpose here, and it's captured, in you read the preamble to the rules of discipline, and where it talks about the purpose of discipline in the church. And it isn't, to beat people up. It isn't to, it isn't primarily about order. It's primarily about wholeness and health in
reconciliation. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, so that I'd say that made an impression on me, and I think I tried to carry that forward when I served as moderator myself. And I hope I did. I know
you did.
We heard some situations where people were very anxious and at odds, and I think you can go into that with just the rules, but it's not going to turn out well. I also I keep coming back to I live very much in the Book of Order. I always have, but this passage in where it talks about the congregation and how it's before you dive deep into the polity of the church and how everything is organized, it says that it's all these rules aren't designed to work outside of a fellowship of trust and love. And that sticks with me too, that if those things break down, then none of the rest of this is going to save us.
And I think that holds true sometimes. Some of the conflicts inside or outside of the church, like when those pillars are not present, right, then then there's going to be discord. I think that's, well, now everything's just been changed in the preamble, but that was one of the phrases that was there before. And I can't recall if the new phrase, it's because many of the things were kept in the new church discipline section. But the about discord, right? And that, to me, discord is easy to be present when those pillars are missing, when we don't trust each other, when we don't, we're not living out in generosity, being generous with the way that we're hearing something. And I mean, the snacks we eat for that day and how much sleep we got can interfere with that stuff. Like we're adults, but in that way, we're all still toddlers, very much so. Like you can get that way. And then it can lead us to these places of conflict. And then, but that's not like fellowship is the purpose, like conflicts will happen. But communally, like we worship God, not individual. It's a communal worshiping, right? We're communal people. So then, are there things that you do now as stated clerk, or ways that you lift that up for your presbytery to say, how do we help support these relationships and build on these pillars, in order to basically, I guess, like to thrive, to grow.
Yeah, I think especially coming out of COVID, one of the things that people are looking for is connection. And we went through a season where all of our meetings were online because they had to be.
Right.
And as we come out of that, I think a lot of people value the convenience and the accessibility, but also look for those opportunities to get together. And so my new presbytery, National Capital Presbytery, has made an effort to have something, right, that's of community-wide interest every month that there's not a presbytery meeting. There's going to be some gathering that you can come to that will serve the purposes of building up the church in one way or the other, but also just provide opportunities for people to be in proximity to each other and to nurture those relationships. And I think that's been really important, as people say, hey, why don't we still do every single meeting in person? And we do we just last week came off of an in-person presbytery meeting that I think people really valued. But as we get into winter months, and probably this is even more the case in the Northeast, right?
Yes.
That you're kind of rolling the dice when you schedule a meeting in January, if you expect.
Yeah, I actually think our January meeting is scheduled via Zoom. They're always going to be hybrid now, I think, moving forward. But we just had one not so long ago, and it was in person. And of course, there were a handful of us on Zoom because, for somebody sometimes like me, I look at my schedule and I'm like, I can go to the meeting during the meeting time. What I can't get there is the commute. I can't do the commute.
Yeah.
Because if I do the commute, then I have to say, you have to not do these other things. And sometimes that would result in not going to the meeting. It depends on what those other things are, like how that stuff gets prioritized. And so there is a little more flexibility, but I enjoy face-to-face sort of stuff with people absolutely. And so what would some of those, just because now I'm picking like the presbytery funness or whatever, what are some of those things that people have decided are worth connecting over in National Presbytery? What are the things that have gone super well, those connecting?
Yeah, so this past year in February, we had a gathering bringing in a speaker to talk about innovative forms of worship and just kind of making a day of it.
Right.
where, kind of connect over a meal. And then we had another speaker from the Presbyterian Foundation in April to talk about stewardship and storytelling, and had a bunch of folks show up for that. I think in June, there was a movie, a film that we showed about the experiences of white Presbyterian pastors during the civil rights movement in the South, and some of the costs that they paid for advocating for an integrated congregation, or speaking out in support of the civil rights movement. This month we're going to be doing something new, the first presbytery-wide installation service, where we're just installing a bunch of pastors in a single service. So what we found is that doing things the traditional way, which is you sort of have a one-off Sunday afternoon, and the invitation goes out to the whole presbytery, and then like 3 people show up, if you're lucky.
And your committee that has to be there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of feeling like, this is really about the presbytery celebrating this new connection between a pastor and a congregation that they've begun to serve, and drawing attention to the reality that we don't minister alone, that we're no church is an island, no minister is an island, that we exist in this larger community that supports us, that holds us accountable, and that just kind of undergirds the ministry that we do. So we have, I think the count was 7 pastors that we're going to be installing at a single service.
Wow.
And inviting the rest of the clergy and elders to renew ordination vows as part of that service, bringing in a guest preacher. So, making it into a big deal.
Right.
And, not, it's not required. It's an invitation to new path. Like, you can schedule an installation service in the traditional way if you want. But I'm grateful that some folks have signed on to do it in a new way, and I'm just kind of curious to see how it plays out. We don't have to do things in the way that we've always done them. We can experiment. And
now you're just talking ridiculous, right? That's just but no, it is true. I mean, because our book of order, our rules does it actually invite us to be playful. It's just some of us aren't very good at playfulness. That's not our skill set. So we need other people to be like, no, it's okay. It's okay if we play a little bit, like, or be creative. Like, we're actually called to be creative and imaginative and playful and to laugh with each other. That's part of being in community.
Imagination is right there in our ordination vows.
It is in our ordination vows. But so it's interesting. I mean, I love hearing what other people are doing, and also I'm wondering if not having those other pieces like innovative worship service and having someone speak to you about that did help then open people up to be, a little more like, okay, well, let's try something new. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? We'll do it differently. Again, it's not like you can't, or maybe we'll go back to doing it the same, or maybe because it didn't work, we just have to tweak little pieces and then we can do something entirely new next time. But this process of, I call it now, I've begun calling it holy feedback instead of constructive criticism. It just helps me better to hear what people are saying if I think of it as holy feedback, rather like an invitation to to spend more time developing a new skill set or something versus being like, you really suck at this sort of thing and you need to get better. Here, take a class.
Yeah. It's the growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
Is the terminology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's good if we have our, our governing bodies or whatever also reminding us to have that sort of mindset, and they're reminding us by doing it themselves, right? So the presbytery, by modeling this, maybe will encourage other other people of the presbytery to do something similar, and to be like, look, we only become good at stuff because we practice, right? Like, and I'm the worst pastor because I make us sing songs all the time that we've never sung before. But part of that is I'm like, look, you learned to sing Amazing Grace one time too. It's just, you learned it so young, you don't remember learning it, but you did learn it. It's not like you didn't like, it wasn't imprinted.
Right.
There was a time where you learn these things too. And so now we'll just learn something new. And sometimes the learning is, I don't want to learn that. That's not, that's not for me. I don't want to know how to do that sort of stuff. So what are the places now that you feel, I mean, in this job and in this work, but I guess also, as a parent, as a spouse, as a dog owner, like, where are those places that you feel like you're developing a growth mindset? So stick with that theme for right now.
I feel like I'm living growth mindset this year. I started left an old job after 17 years and started a new one. Left the home that the church owned home that my family had occupied for 17 years, and we bought our own home for the first time. Moved across states, threw myself into a much larger but lively and faithful presbytery than I'd ever been part of before. So I kind of feel like I've given myself permission this year to explore and not to feel like I have to be an expert yet. It's funny. I think I've always and this goes back to the poking around on computers thing.
Right.
I think curiosity and exploration has always been really essential to how I move through the world. And that sometimes when you are in a flood of new experiences, you need that space just to kind of take it in and feel like this is new and I'm still figuring it out, and that's okay for a while.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so sort of, I think something many of us struggle with is the need to be perfect at something right away, without recognizing that perfection isn't really possible.
Right.
Right. It's not like you might do it perfectly, whatever, but like one time or in that moment, it might seem like you did it perfectly because all the pieces just fell into place. But I often go in default, and I'm not an athlete, David. I've never been an athlete. I mean, I enjoy working out, but that's not like athleticism, right? But I love watching the Olympics and stuff, right? But part of that is I love watching the story, or I like watching the heats in a track race, because I'm like, all of these are world class. They're all elite. They're all like the best at what they do from their countries and all these stuff. And yet they get here and you don't make it to the semis and you don't make it to the finals. And you might even have gone in with the best ranking and you DQ'd. because it happens. Or like our men's 4x100, the US men's 4x100, I feel like we dropped that baton more than any other teams ever in the relays, but so sometimes even if you have 4 of the fastest people in the world, if something just doesn't click, a baton gets dropped, or your foot goes over the line, or whatever, or you bobble, and then that's it. And all those things are reminders that even when you're the best at what you do, perfect comes and goes in moments, right? And I think it's good for us to be reminded that the processes and the ways that we do things, or the ways that we continue to do it even when it doesn't go the way we want to, is essential to growing as people, and to modeling to our communities that we're involved in. So that's exciting. I think that's exciting for National Capital Presbytery to have somebody in there who's like, hey, this is a season of growth.
Right. Yeah. And I'd say too, I was thinking about just the transition and role. I as I said, been a pastor for 17 years, and meaning being in the pulpit at least 46 Sundays a year.
Yeah.
And the transition away from that, constantly preaching, to like now I'm hearing more sermons than I mean, I'm still preaching from time to time, but
right.
But I'm in the pew more often, and just feel like it can be a real gift, not to exhort so much as just to offer that basic grace, right? That just to push the message that you are a beloved child of God, and you are enough as you are to be loved and accepted, and start on that solid space, and see where you can go from there.
If we could all ingrain that bit of wisdom into our daily lives, remembering that, then I think the world itself would be a better, at least maybe a more generous place than it sometimes feels like it is now. And so you really get to, like, do you go to one? Does your family like ground in one particular church? Because that's got to be hard as a parent. Like, your kids came from this like every Sunday environment, the same place, a place that they grew up in. Now, do you guys church hop together, or is that like something you do alone? And
that was one of the hardest things about. So because I had made the decision to leave my call, and I mean, certainly my wife and I had talked about it, but it had implications for their relationships with the people of that church. We did have a season this spring where I was commuting between New Jersey. I will say the church was incredibly generous in allowing us, and we did offer something in return in terms of rent, but in allowing us to stay in the manse where we had lived, so that the kids could finish the school year. My wife, who's a teacher, could finish the school year. But in the meantime, we're living next to the church, but we can't go on a Sunday morning. So there was a Lutheran ELCA church in town that the pastor was fairly new. I think a week after I had met her, I announced to the congregation that I would be leaving.
You were leaving?
and she was great in welcoming our family, and that church was wonderful too. But it was always, with the knowledge that we're not going to stick
And
around.
I should say, for people listening who are wondering, who are not Presbyterian or don't remember that part of the Book of Order, there is actually a rule saying that you're not really allowed to do that. You're not really allowed to keep going there after you've left,
Yeah.
right? So it's not like it's not a desire not to want to go. There's actually a rule that says that David's not allowed to go.
And that's to allow, that's to make an intentional end of the relationship as pastor, and just allow the church to do its own searching about what its leadership needs are and what it's called to do in the next season. And that rather than me sticking around and kibitzing through all of that, allowing them to have that freedom to explore. It was, they unfortunately, just because it's hard to find pastoral leaders these days, it took them until about a week before we moved in July, all the way from January. So 6 months to find an interim pastor. And they were just, kind of using pulpit supply until then. So I do.
I mean,
bad about that, but
the transitions are difficult, and there's a process of grief. That's why we have things like, that's why interim ministry is so essential for that. And sometimes, like, the pause in the process, or how long it takes, I mean, we never know how, like, there are a variety of reasons why it takes time. Who knows, maybe it was to give time for all those other things to close, that God was like, it's all right, we'll just take our time, it'll be fine if it's 6 months from now,
for the right leader to become available, right?
For the right person, because it's
Providence.
it's worse, right? Exactly. Thank gosh we believe in that. But like, it's worse when you get somebody who's not the right fit, because you just want to move from step to step to step to step. And I'm somebody who defaults there, right? So it's good, like, I have intentional people in my life who will be like, let's pause, let's breathe, let's wait. Because I'm like, what, wait, why do we have to wait? But waiting is important.
But so you had asked, though, about now that we're settled
now
here,
where are they?
I had very intentionally backed off being directive about where we were going to worship, because my family didn't get to decide to leave. They also my kids weren't there yet when I came to the church, but my wife Amy had very little say in that as well. This is going to be your church because it's my job,
right?
And so
that's what my son, by the way, reminds us all the time. He's like, we don't have to go to Dad's work, why do we have to go to yours? And I was like, teenager.
So I kind of intentionally said, I'm occasionally going to have my own Sunday commitments, that where we end up has got to work for my spouse and for my kids. And I think we're kind of homing in on one particular church, but we've been kind of visiting around and seeing what's nearby us. So that's been good.
But what a gift too, because I imagine looking for a place, especially when you're allowing your family to take the lead on this versus the way it normally goes when you're feeling called to a position that your family might not be taking the lead. But like, again, that's like a gift. Even it must be so different. Do you look for the same things when you were looking for a call as the pastor to like lead, as you do when you're looking for a place to feel at home in a pew? They can't be the same search process,
right?
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, I will say a huge part of it is, just. I mean, at this point, I'm kind of speaking for my family, but but the ability to connect to people in the congregation, and are these folks that we're going to be able to learn and worship and do ministry alongside.
Right.
I think probably for pastors, maybe we should prioritize that more. I don't know. I think as a pastor, when you're doing your due diligence on a congregation, you're obviously not able to do lots of home visits and figure out who the people are ahead of time, just for boundary reasons. And so you end up like looking at metrics, right? And sort of how stable are they, which, I think is fair, right? If you're going to move and accept a position and put your family through a lot of upheaval, you don't want to go someplace that, you're not going to have a job in 2 years.
Right.
But it's not the same as deciding where you want to worship and serve as a member of a congregation. I will. I think this story is relevant. I'm going to insert it here.
Please.
There was a member at the church that I served in New Jersey. We were having a after church forum once, and talking. It was sort of the first step in this kind of evangelism program. And so we were talking about, well, what brings you here week after week? Why do you keep coming? And a lot of the folks said things that made me feel really good about how they like the preaching, and the preacher always likes to hear that.
Right.
Or that the music was nice and meaningful. And then this woman said something that stuck with me ever since. She said, I come every week because I don't know who's going to be sitting in the pew next to me, and whether they need a word of encouragement, or somebody to hold their hand, or somebody to cry with them as they pray. Yeah. And I was just completely floored because, again, it's something that's in the Book of Order, right? That being a member of a church is a ministry. But this was somebody who had so thoroughly internalized that sense that she talked about it as the reason why she showed up on Sunday was, I'm called to minister, and I need to be present for somebody who might need me to be there.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, to think about, like, yes, you can't do ministry if you're not present in some way, shape, or form. And there can be lots of ways. Like, I have people who, when they can no longer be in the pews, they are present for the people in the congregation through phone calls and letters and stuff like that, which is still, I mean, it's absolutely essential to the work that we do, and it's nice. But I guess I've never heard anybody articulate it that way, but that's powerful.
And I would, over the years, put her on the spot again and again about, like, this is like really lifting it up as this is what it means to belong here, is that you're called to serve.
And also, like, I can imagine it gets into other things that maybe we fail to talk about sometimes. I know as a pastor, it's something I have to remind myself of, but also, because we do this work together, to be reminded of that we are not called to be those things just on Sunday morning in a pew, right?
Yeah.
That we actually are called, not only the Bible says that, our Book of Order also says that, right? Like, these are ways that we're expected to behave even outside of the walls of wherever we gather, or the places that we gather, like that, like, we have to, these are things we're called to do beyond just once a week for an hour.
A new quality of relationships, as I think one of the things, right?
Right. I mean, one of the things, like, you talked about this stewardship and storytelling, and I know that was a webinar that the Synod of the Northeast had, and maybe it was even the same speaker. But like, that's part of the stuff I'm working on right now in my doctoral program, is to thinking about these words like legacy and stewardship, and, like, if we know what we want to be known for or remembered as, right? What characteristics, what things we want to be remembered for, then are those ways, right? What are those practices, which I would call stewardship practices, that we do to ensure that that's the way we're going to be known? Like, if you want to be remembered as individually as somebody who's kind and generous, then you can't, your life can't be lived in a way where you don't ever practice that. And you're just like, I just want people to know me as kind and generous.
Yeah.
Well, if they don't see you being kind and generous, if they don't have those kind of stories to tell, that's not going to happen. So, like, if we as a church communities or as a presbytery or as whatever, like, if we want to be known as something, and sometimes that gets articulated in our mission statements, right? Or you hope it does. Then we have to make sure that the ways that we live that out would ensure that sort of legacy. And because for me, it speaks to intentional living. And I would say that when I try to summarize Jesus's ministry, if I have to, because it's very full, but intentionality is one of those first words that comes to me about Jesus's ministry, right? Yeah. He did things on purpose for reasons, like clear reasons. He practiced those things. And I think being present calls us to be intentional with the things that we say and we do as people. And sometimes that intention can be, I'm intentionally being more curious this year, right? That's a way to do that, because I think it has the potential to open us up and allow for the Spirit to move and breathe and work in us, versus sometimes what the struggle I have with God is going, but I really want the Spirit to direct me over here. And God's like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Right. Come back. So, I mean, I think that woman's statement speaks to that level of intentionality with ministry, which is part of the practice. I don't know. I got choked up, but I always blame the pollen in the air of things. I don't know that there's pollen currently in my office, but so one of the things that I always ask as we sort of close our time together is the question that I've been asking this in the last couple of years has been around the Care Bears.
Yes. Right.
So that is for me, like, Care Bears are emblematic of like a symbol of the Holy Spirit. And so I've been thinking about it in terms of, right, what color Care Bear would you be, or colors? You don't have to choose a color, you can do whatever you want. And then what's that like core symbol, that unique gift of David? How would that be symbolized, that God is like shooting out into the universe?
So I will admit, I looked at some of your other episodes, and and so I knew you're going to ask something along these lines, and I had to familiarize myself, because going back to I don't know, it was probably third grade the last I engaged with the Care Bears.
Care Bears. I mean, truthfully, me too. Before I started, I don't know when they came back into my. I do actually. I blame Dave Chappelle for planting that seed there. But yes.
Yeah. And I was trying to seeing that there's been all these additions, right, over and I don't know. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about curiosity, and I guess one of the later bears to get added was Wonder Heart, who's this little kind of child bear. I think Wonder Heart is pink, and has kind of a radiating heart, but just symbolizes curiosity and openness, and some kind of opening heart I think,
Right.
would be the emblem I would choose. Not a question mark. I I mean, I feel like that brings too many negative connotations, right?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, but open heart, open mind, open arms,
Right.
to receive the people and the providential circumstances that God sends my way,
Right.
is what I would want to put out into the world. Yeah.
I mean, it is what you've lifted up even today, is that like sitting in the pew has reminded you about, right, that
Mhm.
belovedness, right? You're a beloved child of God.
Mhm.
And then curiosity, of course, means, yes, sometimes it means you get to an answer, and
Mhm.
sometimes it just means you get to explore new avenues. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things, but we can't, if we are always just asking the questions without, I guess, putting some of that stuff into practice, then we don't, like, you would never have developed your algorithms or codes if you hadn't trialed and errored them. Like,
That's
it's
right.
not right. You can be as curious about them as you want, but if they can't come into something that works if you don't, like.
My son was experimenting with Minecraft the other day, because he's a big Minecraft fan, and he was
Well, all right,
trying to
coding.
enter some code for a command block, and was complaining, it's not working. And I kind of laughed and said to him, coding is one big exercise in telling the computer over and over again, that's not what I meant.
Right, right. But then, I mean, but what a lesson too, to go, and how do you learn to say what you mean? You
Yeah.
practice it, right? You practice it until, I mean, there was a great TED Talk I watched some time ago. I like to watch, well, I like to watch a lot of TED Talks, but I also like the TED Eds and the shorter clips. The TED Eds often are geared towards children. But that, I mean, that doesn't bother me. I don't, I'm like, I don't know why that riddle works that way either. But there was one on that I was specifically watching a series of TED Talks on artificial intelligence. And one of the things they were saying is, like, the program just does what you've told it to do,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't think like, oh, I have to, like, it doesn't think, right?
Right.
It's just like, that's just, it's artificial. It doesn't actually have this, it processes what you tell it to process, not, it doesn't go, it really would have worked better if you'd put a space there, or what.
It's a glorified version of the autocomplete on your phone. It's gonna spew out what it expects to see.
Right. And so, like, I don't know if you've seen that recent meme of, like, putting into, telling you the chat GPT or whatever, or writing into code, like, Jesus flipping the tables. And it's a meme of, like, Jesus flipping over a
Right.
like doing a backflip over a table.
Yeah.
But what that is it points out exactly, like, what artificial intelligence, like, if you just write the code, sometimes you'll learn, oh, that's not what it's not what I meant.
Yeah.
But getting more honed in, it can help you learn how to also practice what you mean.
Yeah.
You're getting smarter, so AI looks smarter.
Well, I think it brings us back to openness again, because it's a reminder that those systems are closed. They don't know anything more than what's already been put into them, and they can kind of rearrange it and spew it out in different ways. But if you want them to do different things, you need to add to their repository. And I think that's where we stand with respect to God too. That our sense as Reformed Christians that we need to be saved. That there is not within us the capacity for us to be those creatures that God expects us to be, without something extra coming from God, from the Holy Spirit's kindling something new in us, and without an openness to receiving something that's not yet a part of us, we're not going to be able to experience that. So yeah.
Beautifully said. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Like I said early on, that is for me, has been my experience of you, is you always take these like massive blocks of whatever, or numbers or zeros and ones, and you turn them into something pastoral and beautiful.
Yeah.
And so thank you for doing it yet again, as we've come to a close of our time. And I have really appreciated grabbing a cup of coffee with you, David. Thank you.
Absolutely.